The new DC Studios continues to be the topic of conversation, and not for good reason. Rumors are swirling around about James Gunn not necessarily being fit for the job. People are still mad about Henry Cavill not being Superman, and so much more. We're going to talk about all of that and more in this new video and answer the question, have people lost faith in DC, or is the DC fandom just a little too toxic? Let's get into it. What's going on, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another discussion video. Today, I want to continue talking about the whole DC drama that has been happening recently under new management. DC Studios obviously being run by James Gunn and Peter Safran, and things have not necessarily gone the way that a lot of fans might have anticipated. Now, maybe they put a little too much, at stake, or perhaps they put a little too many high expectations on James Gunn to kind of fix things while simultaneously reading people's minds and keeping things exactly the way that they wanted to with some of the key characters like Henry Cavill. It's hard to say at this point, but I wanted to get into, some recent tweets that James Gunn put out there and kind of spell something out that has been happening at DC that we haven't experienced in past years. So let's get into it. So involving James Gunn, there's been rumors that are swirling around that, some people working within DC don't necessarily have faith that James Gunn is necessarily cut out for the role because he hasn't quote unquote run anything. But if we were to look at his track record and specifically look at some of the films and projects that he has worked on in the past, I'd like to think that his record speaks for itself. The Guardians of the Galaxy films that he's been a part of, and even the better Suicide Squad that I actually enjoyed, I would say are clear indications that he is more than capable of developing a very cohesive story for the fans, one that's engaging, one that's exciting, and one that will inevitably make sense in the grander scheme of things. Now, I know that that doesn't necessarily translate to can you run an entire studio, but how is anybody supposed to know if they don't give him the chance to at least try? I would say that his creative pedigree more than gives him at least the opportunity to at least try to steer the ship. Now, if after a year or so things aren't necessarily working out the way that anybody would have hoped, and maybe the first films that they put out under James Gunn completely tanked, then sure, maybe we can have a different conversation. But I think people are being a little too premature to assume that he can't do the job just because of what? Because Henry Cavill isn't Superman anymore? That's obviously one major change that has happened recently under the James Gunn's umbrella. However, I don't think it's any indication or any fault of his own. And it's really, obviously, that's a different discussion for a different time as to who necessarily should take the blame. But long story short, I think the blame has to be placed on Warner Brothers. Warner Brothers had 10 years, and the previous, DC heads and those who were responsible for this connected universe had many years and many opportunities to create a cohesive, extended universe that made sense with a story that fans could connect with in many ways, leading to a grander climactic ending, kind of what like what fans have seen with what Marvel's done over the last couple years. But they didn't do it. For some reason, they didn't do it. Marvel printed out the blueprint and DC just never followed through. So now James Gunn has a massive responsibility, because not only does he have to build an entirely new universe from scratch, but he also has to be the one that takes the blame for some of the tougher decisions that were never made by him. I think Warner Brothers and the previous heads of DC not utilizing Henry Cavill is not James Gunn's fault, but it's DC's fault. DC should have used him. We should be talking about Man of Steel 4 right now. At this point, after 12 plus years of Henry Cavill being the previous Superman, we should have had at least a trilogy under our belt. But for some reason, they didn't even want to cash in on their most popular character that had already had a film. Again, conversation for a different day and things that we may never understand. But I say all that to say that James Gunn has a tall task, and he's taken a lot of heat, so much heat in fact that he had to recently jump on Twitter and talk about some of the things that he's been, him and Peter Safran have been hearing and have been seeing on Twitter and social media, because DC fans aren't happy. I think they're really bitter. And I think just in an instant, overnight, people have lost their faith, or at least some of the fans have, in terms of, James Gunn's ability to run the ship in a way that will make people happy. And I think, taking Henry Cavill out of the situation, out of the equation, I think was a pretty big move, but one that, perhaps needed to happen. And I think we'll get into that in another video. But for now, let's jump into the tweets. I'm going to pull these on screen. And he starts off by saying, one of the things Peter and I were aware of when we took the job as heads of DC Studios was a certain minority of people online that could be, well, uproarious and unkind, to say the least. He then goes on to say, our choices for the DC are based upon what we believe to be the best for the story and best for the DC characters who have been around for nearly 85 years. Perhaps these choices are great, perhaps not, but they are made with sincere hearts and integrity and always with the story in mind. No one loves to be harassed or called names, but to be frank, we've been through significantly worse. Disrespectful outcry will never, ever affect our actions. I mean, my man James Gunn came out and said it off jump. He said, cry all you want. Henry's not coming back. And you can be upset about it. You can ban any future films. It will be you that misses out. Now, granted, I understand that the fans are the ones who buy the tickets. The fans are the ones who bring in the bucks for these films, right? They make the films, but it really is about getting the trust of the fans in order to go see those films for them to be deemed, quote unquote, a financial success. But I think when all is said and done and people see the first trailers for whatever James Gunn has in store in the future, or when they see that press conference that is going to happen in January about the future, you know, the first phase of this new era of DC, I think people will come around. But it's cool to see the head of DC Studios get right out in front of it and say, look, I see that you guys are upset. I see you're kind of bitter about the situation of things. I don't care. You know, I'm sure he means that respectfully, of course, right? I think if anybody cares more about the story and the creative process and building a universe that makes sense with characters that are true and genuine and have depth and you know, all of that, I think it's James Gunn. So I don't think he makes a decision to not run with Henry Cavill lightly. I'm sure he knew that a lot of people loved Henry Cavill and that they wanted him back. But in terms of building a whole new story, and we'll get into that in a moment, I think this is a move that potentially was necessary for the greater picture, even if it's a picture that we don't necessarily see in the moment. He finishes off by saying, we are aware that there would be a period of turbulence when we took this gig, and we knew we would sometimes have to make difficult and not so obvious choices, especially in the wake of the fractious nature of what came before us. But this means little to us in comparison to our jobs as artists and custodians in helping to create a wide and wonderful future for DC. I just wanted to point this tweet out because I think it points out a number of things that are really the core of this video. And that is the fact that you have a studio head in James Gunn that has already done something that DC has failed to do before, and that's transparency. That's getting out in front of the audience when people are upset, reading the comments, listening to the fans and saying, hey, we hear you. But this is an important decision in a greater scheme, in a greater story that you may yourself not see as of yet. But one day, you will. It's like, you know, when your parents say, one day, when you're older, you'll understand. That's basically what James Gunn is saying. He's sitting us down as children, and, you know, for all the petulant children out there who are crying and whining about, you know, Henry Cavill no longer being Superman, and he's saying, here, listen here, slugger. Things may not be in the way that you imagine. You may not like the way that things are happening, but this is important. And when you're older, you'll understand. And it's kind of funny when you read it that way, but it's something that we haven't seen from DC in a long time. I think DC fans have been really envious of Marvel, or at least many of them have, over the kind of communication that Kevin Feige has offered through multiple press conferences every year, through, you know, some of the trailers, through jumping out on social media as well. And it's nice to see that James Gunn too is also taking that in stride and saying, you know, I'm going to get out and be the face of this company because somebody has to. And I think that that's something that people are kind of ignoring. And again, the core of this video is just one, talking about how he is getting out in front of it, and two, like I said, just the communication, the transparency, the ability to tell the fans what is happening, even if it's an unpopular decision, even if it's something that fans aren't going to be happy with and they don't like. And I think we have to also look at the fact that this is not the first thing that we have heard. Obviously, we heard about Aquaman probably not continuing, although Jason Momoa may be recast as a different actor. We also have heard that Wonder Woman will not be continuing. But outside of that, he also has come out and stated that there are no other recastings happening outside of, I believe he said, Suicide Squad. So outside of Suicide Squad, no other characters are going to be recast. We're still going to see John Cena as Peacemaker. We're still probably going to see, I believe it's Viola Davis, right? In the character that she plays. And we're still going to see whoever else exists as those characters as well. We probably won't see The Flash. all of that part, that whole universe is probably donezo, and rightfully so. It was an absolute mess. The whole previous DC has been around for how many years? Over a decade, and we're just now getting a Flash movie when Flash is a core component of the Justice League. Again, just absolutely makes no sense. And this has kind of been the problem with DC in the past. There's been no continuity. I saw a quote the other day that I can't remember where I saw, where it said that DC in the past has had, you know, they've had Marvel-like ambitions with Kingdom Hearts continuity. And if you've played Kingdom Hearts before or played them in the past, I'll break it down for you. Kingdom Hearts was a game that absolutely made no sense. It took us over a decade to get Kingdom Hearts 3 from Kingdom Hearts 2. And in between those two games, we had a flurry of backstory side quest spin-offs that came out that were kind of integral to the game, but they only ever came out on DC or on the DS and multiple versions of the DS. So if you didn't have a DS, you weren't playing these games. It just wasn't happening. And so when you finally get to Kingdom Hearts 3, I'll never forget it, and I'll never recover from it emotionally. That when that game finally came out, I had no idea what was happening. Absolutely none. Why? Because there were like 8 different titles that dropped that were connected to the story in some way, but they weren't mainline releases, but they were still important to the story. That's kind of like what we've seen in DC. All these characters are important, and you know they're important. However, they connect, and their films connected in almost zero way possible. We got a Man of Steel film, and then we got a Batman film. Oh, I'm just kidding. We never got a Batman film with Ben Affleck. And then we got a Batman versus Superman. It was a time in the DC universe where it felt like they were just making films to make money, and whatever other agendas that they have. But it wasn't for the continuity of the story. It wasn't to create a connected universe. And I think that's what James Gunn and Peter Safran are trying to do. And again, we may not see that now, and we may just kind of be in the hard part of it, where certain decisions are having to be made, but trust, you know, them kind of saying, trust us, this is going to make sense in the future. When January hits, we have our press conference, we tell you exactly what we're trying to do, and maybe it's, you know, potentially a timeline as what Marvel has done, a slate of films that are coming out within the next couple years that will, you know, continue to move the story, move the needle ahead. Then it'll all make sense. But for now, it doesn't, and people are mad about it. But again, I think the faith in DC is not the fault of James Gunn. I think that the lack of faith that people have in DC is really due to over a decade of no communication, no continuity with their films, and just bad films, bad sequels. The list goes on and on. But I think, like they've said before, I think they acknowledge that their task is tough and that it is a tall order that they face, and they're kind of facing it on day by day, and we're kind of along for the journey. But I think at the end of the day, whether you like the decision to remove Henry Cavill or not, I think it's going to make sense, you know, in time. We just won't see it yet. I don't think, in my personal opinion, if you care about my opinion, I have not lost faith in DC. I actually have more faith in DC now, knowing that they have a creative genius behind, you know, James Gunn and Peter Safran, who have made, who, you know, I'm not hyping them up. They have a resume, and their resume speaks for itself. You can't tell me Guardians of the Galaxy isn't good. The holiday special wasn't great. The second, you know, the rebooted Suicide Squad wasn't excellent. Like, those were great, and those are just some of the projects that they've worked on in the past. So I have faith in them. I am bitter that Henry Cavill won't be Superman anymore, but if that means that the story makes sense in the grand scheme of things years from now when we're looking back, I'm all for it. DC has desperately needed a reboot for a long time, and James Gunn is just having to be the loaded gun, no pun intended, that is, you know, pointing and kind of taking down all of these ideas that were just ideas. They never actually formed anything, and having to recreate something from scratch in hopes that people like it. And I believe that they will. So that's my thought on it. I haven't lost faith in DC. I fully believe that they can steer the ship in the right direction. And, you know, if I'm wrong in that, we'll be having a different discussion in years' time. But for now, that's all for me, guys. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, drop a like on it, as it greatly helps out the channel, really helps me support, and it's a free way to support the channel. And let me know down in the comment section below what your thoughts are on this. If you agree with me or disagree with me, either way, I want to hear your comments down in the comment section below. I want to have a discussion about this, and get you guys input as well. But until then, guys, that is all for me. Hit the sub button if you haven't already. We've got videos, trailer reactions, trailer breakdowns, all that good stuff, discussion videos, all of that on the way each and every week. I work really hard on these videos, and I love just being able to have a platform where we can talk about things like this, pop culture related things on the daily. So I appreciate your support. But that's all for me, guys. Thank you so much for watching. As always, my name is That Guy Rye, and I will see you in the next one.